fix that up. I'll start speaking once we have sound. So checking, I need to hear from a commenter. They're still saying there's no sound. Still no sound. It's not just you. Nobody can hear me. We will be with you very soon. I'm still talking away to nothing. It sounds like, aha, people are saying the sound is on. Okay, thank you for your patience. Sometimes we get bugs. So, I mean, it was part of my opening thing talking to you about this is a live show, and we do occasionally get those hiccups. Nico does a fantastic job, but there's just so many wires and buttons and plugs and microphones. Things will happen. So back to where I'll start right from the top. It's February 9th, 2022. Welcome again to Triggered. I'm still Cory Morgan, and we are coming to you from the Western Standard Studios, which are on permanently ceded territory in Calgary, Alberta, as per Treaty 7. This is our live show, as has been quite evident. That will come every day, 11:30 Mountain Standard Time, a.m., Monday to Friday, because the news is always breaking and changing, and we need to keep up with it, because as I said earlier, talk radio has become unlistenable, but we can fill that void. We don't need the mainstream anymore. Comments are welcome. You can tell me about things what you like or you don't like, or as you've all been doing, thank you, letting me know how our sound is doing. Tell us what we can do better or what you want to see. Guest suggestions are always welcome. I got a couple of great guests today. Spencer Fernando. Some people may be familiar with him. He's a columnist, blogger. He's out of Manitoba, and he went to the protests out there in Winnipeg, and it's going to be good to, don't hear enough from that part of Western Canada, kind of right in the middle there. He's going to talk to us about what's happening out that way in these crazy times. Then I'm going to have Wildrose Independence Party leader Paul Hinman come on to the show, and we're going to talk about Alberta politics, and he's running in the Fort McMurray by-election. Yeah, there's a by-election happening up there, or pretty quickly anyways. And I'm going to talk a bit about that in my opening rant here quickly. First, though, I do want to talk about one of our sponsors. I might as well get that going, because we do not take tax funding. We qualify for some of it, actually. There's some subsidies we could get. We refuse to take it. We stay independent. And that relies on sponsors. One of our sponsors is Bitcoin Well. These guys are great. They got the fastest, safest way to buy Bitcoin. It's non-custodial, and that means you will always control your Bitcoin. They never have their hands on it. They just facilitate your getting into the business. It goes directly to your wallet. Watch for those other services out there, where they sit in the middle, they're custodial. It means they actually have possession of your funds for a period of time, and that can be dangerous. These guys are not that way. You're always in control of it. They're a publicly traded company. They have ATMs throughout the West to help you deposit into your Bitcoin account. They make it as easy as it gets, and they will help guide you into the world of digital currencies. Check them out, bitcoinwell.com. Western Canada company. I'll talk a little more about them later. They are great. Okay, now what am I on about today? Politicians, always somebody's favorite people. They love hiding from tough issues. They're deferring to deal with them as much as possible. At least the weak ones do. Tough ones, they take challenges head on, win or lose. The protests across Canada continue to expand in both scope and intensity, while Prime Minister Trudeau avoids dealing with it as much as possible. He disappears, he pops up maybe to throw out some insults, and then he disappears again. That's not leadership. But you know what? This rant today isn't just about Prime Minister Trudeau's lack of leadership. I'm going to go on about Premier Jason Kenney. People can be forgiven for forgetting that the constituency of Fort McMurray-Lac-La-Biche is having a by-election right away. The spot was vacated 6 months ago by Leila Goodrich when she went to pursue a federal seat in Ottawa. Now, Premier Jason Kenney would very much rather you forgot about the by-election and forgot that it was happening, and has made a point of being about as quiet about it as possible. When you have an election, the leader of a party is going to be making noise about it to try and get supporters going out there. Kenney's been dead silent on that, and you'd think they'd be eager to garner a new loyal UCP member in that seat. Problem is, Brian Jean has other plans. He handily won the UCP nomination for the seat, despite the best efforts of Kenney loyalists. Jean ran on nothing aside from a promise to unseat Kenney as premier as soon as possible. That promise proved appealing to a lot of members, and now he's won the nomination to run for the UCP. He may very likely win that seat itself. Now, Kenney can't wait any longer to hold the by-election. The UCP waited the full 6-month maximum before calling the race. They haven't even actually called it yet, but they legally have to by this Wednesday. They have no choice anymore. So he waited till the bitter end. That means that the by-election is going to conclude in mid-March. News is going to be focused on Brian Jean's campaign and his possible win just weeks before Kenney faces a review of his leadership by members in April. The timing could hardly be worse for Kenney. He's likely going to have a newly minted MLA within his own party whose entire platform was based on opposition to himself. It'll hardly lend a sense of strength or control to Kenney's already shaky caucus. Now, had Kenney at least called the by-election earlier, he could have avoided having the election results hitting the news just before his own leadership review. Of course, then he would have had a toxic MLA working within his own caucus for that much longer. Kenney's found himself between a rock and a hard place, but hey, he put himself there. Look, I do want to give credit to Kenney. He had a good news night in some ways last night. He immediately ended the vaccine passport program, and kids are going to be unmasked in schools starting next week. And he's got plans to dump the rest of the restrictions. A plan that's not enough for some, but it's still definitely better than the nothing we've seen so far. We desperately need to see some light at the end of the tunnel, and some has finally appeared in Alberta. The problem again, though, is Kenney was clearly pushed into dropping these mandates. It wasn't a proactive move, it was reactive. He's facing a potential caucus revolt, and the protests are springing up all over the province, including the troublesome one at the US-Canada border down there in Coutts. Kenney would have liked to hang on to the restrictions until a date closer to his pending leadership review. He wants delegates sighing a breath of relief as mandates are lifted just before the review. He wants people in a good mood, but he chose to do politics rather than going with the science. And he's had no choice. I'm happy the mandates are starting to come down. I don't care what the reasoning is for it. And hopefully we're soon going to be going into a rebuilding and recovery phase from the pandemic. But that's going to require realistic, forward-thinking policies on the part of the government. And I don't maintain much confidence that we're going to be seeing that. We have a leadership deficit on every level of the government. It means not waiting until you're cornered before acting on something. We need them to lead, not keep following issues. And we haven't seen any of that. But time will tell in the days to come. So let's see if we're ready for a check-in from the newsroom. It has just been crazy over there. If Dave wants to give me a wave, if he's up for it, or who we may have, he is. Okay, so let's bring in our news editor, Dave Naylor. Hey, Dave, over there.
Hey, Cory, how's it going?
Very good. Very good.
Good. I'm glad it's going good for you.
Okay, so tell me, I know your exhaust is going on. It's hard to lead you into it, but you've got so much to cover. What are the top stories in the newsroom today, and what are you guys working on?
Oh, a whole mess of stuff, Cory. Right now, the site is leading off with Ottawa police calling in child protective services in the city because they're concerned for the dozens and dozens of children that are living with the truckers, amongst the truckers, in the cabs and all that sort of stuff. They're concerned about sanitary conditions for the kids. They say they're not going to seize any kids, and I think any move to do that would just inflame the situation to no end. But they are going to keep a close monitor on those children. If you listen to last night's Kenney announcement on vaccine mandates in the province, Cory, you heard him compare the treatment of the unvaccinated people in Alberta to the ostracization of AIDS patients back in the 80s. A lot of people were upset about that, and Kenney has very quickly issued an apology, which is unusual for him. He doesn't like to issue apologies. So our legislature reporter, Amber, has got that story up. Mel Risden has been keeping a close eye on the border crisis in Coutts. They were not happy with Kenney's announcements last night. They wanted everything lifted immediately. And shortly after Kenney's speech, they went and blockaded the highway again. So no traffic moving in or out of the border there with Coutts. You remember when GoFundMe canceled their $10 million fundraising campaign for the truckers and decided they were going to keep the money? Well, a new site, the GoSendMe, they have raised that amount already. They've equaled $10 million in donations from, I think, 88,000 donors. So that's been a real incredible outpouring for the truckers. Ontario, their government issued a statement this morning on their COVID plans. They have no plans to go down the path of Alberta and Saskatchewan. They say they're going to be cautious and prudent. One of the things that Kenny did announce was that Flames and Oilers fans going to the game will now be able to have a beer and some popcorn, something which they weren't allowed to do previously. My favorite story of the morning is a Twitter war between Dr. Jordan Peterson, a well-known commentator, and Gerald Butts, the former top aide to Prime Minister Trudeau. They've been going at each other tooth and nail for 4 or 5 days now on Twitter. Butts has finally had enough. He gave Peterson, a chance to apologize, and Peterson basically said, "Sue me." So it looks like Butts is going to. But if you want to read that exchange, it's highly entertaining. And our real estate guru Mike Thomas has a story on Toronto taking over from Vancouver as the priciest place to buy a house in the countries, averaging some ridiculous figure like 1.2 million or something like that. So, busy morning already, Cory, and that's what's on the site right now.
Great. Yeah. 1.2 million into Toronto. I mean, geez, I'd pay a lot of money not to live in Toronto. I feel for those people who I guess have no choice but to live there and have to try and shell out that much to live, because of course that reflects on rent and everything else. But
exactly. I just want to alert the viewers and listeners that we've got a major Pierre Poilievre exclusive. Just typing it up right now, but it'll be a national scoop that you'll first read on the Western Standard, and that should be up about 1:45, and the rest of the day the stories will keep churning out because the news gods aren't giving us a break.
No, they aren't. You're sounding tired already. We still got a couple days left in the week. Well, thanks for the check-in and the heads up on what's coming up in an hour there, Dave, and everything else.
You're welcome, Cory.
All right. So Judy and Jim Gurwatowski. Okay, I hope I'm not slaughtering your name, but a correction from the commenters. Yes, it's give, send, go, not go, send me. All these things, GoFundMe, this, that, and everything. It is difficult. The bottom line is, yes, give, send, go. And if people are interested, you search that out and search for the Truckers Convoy, and you'll find out where you can watch how much that fund has been growing and take part in it if you should choose to. I mean, that's been amazing. I don't even know what they necessarily need all the money for. It doesn't hurt. I mean, there's a lot of truckers to be supplied and people to be funded and, accommodations, you name it. But I just like it as well as how it's such a symbol of cross-Canada support for this. The people who can't, the people who work full-time, people who have kids at home, they can't get out and protest in Ottawa, but they appreciate what the protesters are doing. So they're reaching into their wallets, as Dave said, almost 100,000 of them to fund this thing. And that is more just that giant symbol of support is much more important, almost money's important than the amount of money that's actually been raised. And that's part of look how fast that refilled. The original one, GoFundMe, which isn't the one now, bailed out, public pressure, this and that, not even so much public, government pressure and threats. So they got the hell out of that. And the new one refilled that amount in less than a week. People don't want to give up on this. The Coots border crossing, James, we've allowed him to come home because he's spent a week and some down there. He's tired out. He was covering stuff live, and it's still ongoing now. There's fewer people down there than there used to be, but there's still a large number of people there. It sounds like there's unfortunately a lot of division going on down there too. This happens when you have decentralized leadership. Everybody has a voice and not everybody agrees. But there's been kind of back and forth. They're closing the border, they're opening the border. They're closing it, they're opening. The police have been closing access as well. That can't be forgotten. It's not always the truckers doing it. But it sounds like they've really been working on stopping it up again, and they're discussing that from within on whether they're going to open it or not. That situation I am worried about. I worry about it. We listened to Sonia Savage come out yesterday saying, this is not going to stand for much longer. We listened to the government saying they're going to get more RCMP officers coming out from British Columbia to help clear out that border. They've got a huge amount of logistical issues going on down there. We've talked about that. These are tractors and tractor trailers and trucks and campers and you name it. You can't just pop down there and move them out of the way safely. It's not that easy. But if you build up enough resources, you can really start arresting a lot of people. And I really don't want to see a bunch of protesters being taken away in handcuffs. I'm not saying run for it. I'm not making advice on this one. I'm just worried about this one. I mean, they are definitely showing dedication. I mean, the optics of all those horses riding down the road last week was fantastic. I mean, talk about purely Alberta. But I don't want the optics to end with a dangerous circumstance where protesters and or police officers could get hurt. We're just going to have to watch this as it develops. I mean, some people are happy that the provincial government's backing off more on things and they've reduced some regulations. Some would say it has to be everything. They also can't forget, and again, as you can see, I'm not always easy on Premier Kenney, but he can only do so much. I mean, the whole basis of this thing was the federal mandate for the truckers, and Kenney can't do a single thing about that. That's in Trudeau's department and well worth protesting against. So that's constantly developing and moving. And of course, we update as soon as we hear anything. And we're going to have an exclusive update on the federal leadership, as Dave said. So I'm going to get that plug for ourselves. And while we're at it, our membership numbers, we had our staff meeting today. Holy cow, they have been fantastic. And we really appreciate you guys who have been taking out memberships, taking out subscriptions. And, again, speaking of people paying a bit to help with freedom, well, $10 a month, it's the best deal you're going to get, guys. You get a free trial for a couple of weeks, and people have been trying it out. And again, 95% of them, after 2 weeks, they say, yeah, this is worth $10 a month, price of an old newspaper subscription. And you can bypass that crappy, rotten mainstream media. And it's terrible. Come on, we've been watching that coverage this last few weeks. The bias and the slant has been insufferable. The misinformation, brutal. Something Dave didn't bring up. Yeah, there was a CBC poor old me story on there. Oh, they were complaining about the trials and tribulations of dealing with crabby protesters when they show up. I mean, I don't support physically harassing or intimidating or getting in the face of any press, even if they're ones that we don't like. You've got to let them do their jobs. But hey, they brought a lot of that distrust upon themselves with their terrible, terrible reporting. And that's why people are flooding to new and alternative means to get their information. They're leaving the old establishment media, and that's a very good development these days in this modern world of communication. So speaking of which, I'm going to have shortly here, Spencer Fernando is going to come on in a bit here, and he cuts right through things as well, and he talks directly on issues, and he's not part of that establishment media that's been spoon-feeding you such terrible information for such a long time. But I will speak to our sponsor quickly with the Canada Shooting Sports Association, just to remind you again, this is how we can come through without going after federal tax dollars, which we will never do. We don't want to be subsidized. It's not going to happen. We rely on these sponsors. And the Canada Shooting Sports Association, their name sort of says it all. That's exactly what they are. They're for people involved in shooting sports or just firearm appreciation in general, whether you're collecting them, whether you're a hunter, target shooter, any of those things. They're the resource for you. You can join them. You can see what's happening. They got news on firearms. They've got updates for where there's local trade shows and things like that for firearms going on. And most importantly, they're standing up for firearms owners. I mean, we know that your right and ability to responsibly, safely use firearms is always under threat, particularly when we have a Liberal government. They're always wanting to take away your property. So the Canada Shooting Sports Association has legal challenges, 3 of them. They're out on behalf of firearm owners right now because there are ongoing Liberal gun grabs coming after your firearms. These guys are pushing back. And if we don't push back, they'll win. They'll take your stuff away. So, hey, stand up for yourself and help the Canada Shooting Sports Association stand up for you. Check them out. Their URL is cssa-cila.org, or just Google Canada Shooting Sports Association. You'll find them. Take out a membership with them so they can help you. Okay, let's quit holding him up there in the lobby and bring Spencer Fernando in to have a conversation. Hey, Spencer, how's it going out there in Manitoba?
Not too bad. How are you doing?
Oh, very good. Thanks. Always ranting and raving, but, it's therapeutic for me, and it spares poor Jane's ear for when I get home. A little bit anyways. So you had recently written, as I was kind of saying earlier, in that Manitoba, unfortunately, I mean, it's a great part of Canada, and it's often forgotten. We're right smack in the middle of everything, and it gets underreported. And you went out and attended some of the demonstrations yourself. And that's what's important too. People who get off their butts and check stuff out, they're not just going to beak off about it, and you'll give your unvarnished opinion of it. So maybe let us know about that article and what you did, what you saw.
Yeah, so on last Saturday, went out to in front of the legislature down Broadway, the kind of the main street there, to see what was going on. And it was a pretty huge crowd, lots of trucks, lots of people, very diverse. Certainly not the white supremacists that the media is trying to demonize people as. And it's amazing to see journalists who are trying to, and the establishment media who are trying to demonize the protests and make it look a certain way. And you'll notice they never really actually attend, and they never really go there and talk to people. And so I wanted to go see it for myself. And, what I saw, I think, is quite similar to what we see across the country in terms of, the many different types of people there, the peaceful message, the fact that it's been quite peaceful this whole time. And so I think it's important to get out there and be there, and then get that narrative out on social media to counteract a lot of the lies that, politicians like Justin Trudeau, Jagmeet Singh, and then the establishment media have been pushing.
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, you got to cut through it. It's so easy to just take individual clips and, cherry pick, and you can make anything look however you please. And I found the same thing when I went out Saturday to the Calgary one. I was very impressed. I mean, I've gone to a lot of protests of all kinds, and often they're dominated by anger or pushing or limits or intimidation even. And there was none of that. It was almost like it was a country fair. I mean, just an attitude of bonding and getting along. Is that the sort of attitudes you felt out there in Manitoba as well then?
Yeah, I tweeted about how the main thing really that stood out was how people were smiling, right? People were so glad to be gathering together. I think people are really tired of, seeing masked faces all the time, right? Not being able to interact. And that's just, it's very psychological and almost instinctual, not being able to see, someone's full facial expression, and going over that for 2 years or so. That's quite disturbing for a lot of people. So I think people are glad to be able to gather together and, just talk to like-minded people. And I think the other thing is that people are really getting a sense of hope from the fact that, a lot of Canadians are starting to, toughen up, become more defiant, and push back against the government, as opposed to just, meekly going along as much of the country has up until this point.
Yeah, it's almost uncharacteristic for Canadians. We're always kind of known for we might be upset, but we'll just sit back and take it. And we seem to have hit a tipping point where Canadians, a lot of them are just saying that's enough. We have to stand up for ourselves and move on with things. You guys had, unfortunately, a dangerous episode that happened, and it wasn't due to the truckers convoy protesters, but some lunatic in a Jeep mowed down a few people one evening there in Manitoba. I know you weren't there at that time. Mm-hmm. Thankfully, nobody was killed. I mean, that could have been horrible. The video was just upsetting. Have you had more updates on what's kind of been happening with that? I know they caught the guy who allegedly did it.
Yeah, I mean, they caught him, and it's going through the whole, police process there. I think a lot of people have uncovered that it was someone who seems to have Antifa links, which really, that's not too surprising at this point. But I think what's been interesting is, the way that was covered by much of the media, right? Like, just let's flip it around. Say there was a big left-wing protest, and, someone associated with the far right drove through it and then ran some people over, right? That would be the biggest news story in the country, for a week at least. It would be all over the international news. Justin Trudeau would have already gone on TV and started crying about it. Jagmeet Singh would probably be crying as well. And so it's just interesting to see how the narrative is so different from the supposedly unbiased establishment media, how they cover one thing and they don't cover something else, or they just give, cursory attention to something. And so I think that's another reason I think you said in your lead up to us talking today, just how, trust in the establishment media has really gone down, and a lot of people are turning to the independent media. And I think that's a big reason why people are starting to realize that there's a lot of false narratives that are being pushed, that they create narratives by focusing on one thing but not something else. And people are getting tired of it.
Yeah, and I mean, I posted a picture recently of that time. It was almost comical in such dark times. You've probably seen that meme go around, but it was a reporter for CNN standing with the city burning in the background, mm-hmm. literally burning. Mm-hmm. And his report was, city burns, but mostly peaceful protests. Like, wow, talk about trying to polish a turd. I mean, guys, this was a riot. They're literally burning the city down, and you say mostly peaceful. And then we've got these incredibly peaceful protests across Canada with tens of thousands of people. and they're getting no credit for it. They're trying to look for every little possible offense. I mean, oh, look, somebody threw a tissue on the street corner. We should call in the army.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even, the way they covered, a few people had some, terrible flags. And there was one or two of those. And then if you look at a lot of the media reports, they'll talk about how the crowd was carrying, and then they list the flags, right? As if that was common, right? It was extremely uncommon. And people carrying those flags were quickly pushed out by the vast majority of people there. So it's very interesting to see how, and it's also funny to note that, the people carrying those flags often were the only masked people at the event. So that raises some interesting questions about what was really going on there. So, it's just the narratives are very dishonest. And I think that's, look at what the Liberals are trying to do with Bill, I think it's C-11 now. We're trying to regulate social media, and they're watching what's happening. It used to be easier for them to just tell the media, okay, this is the narrative, this is what you're going to say. You can see Jagmeet Singh and Justin Trudeau just expected that they would just, demonize everyone at the protests as, racist and, sexist and bigoted, far right, whatever. And they expected that, okay, we'll say that, the media will pick up on it, and the protests will go away because everyone in the country will turn against the protesters. But because of independent media and social media, that doesn't work anymore, right? They can't just demonize a bunch of people and expect there to be no pushback. And so that's why they're upset, and they're trying to get control over social media and put the government in charge, because they want to be able to, push their lies without anyone fighting back against it.
Yeah, exactly. They didn't get away with it. And but again, instead of tempering themselves or trying to get honest or realistic, what they're now trying to do is shut down the voices of independent media through C-11. That's such a dangerous bill. And again, certainly not getting enough press. I mean, it's hard, I guess, in such crazy news times to talk about nuances like free speech. But that bill, for people like you and me, scares the heck out of us. That could really hinder our ability to reach out to people.
Yeah, I mean, I think you look throughout history, and, you could say, the arc of justice or whatever, it never really sides with the people who want to restrict what people can, hear and say, right? It's always a sign that you're trying to do something to people that you don't really want them to know about. You don't want people to criticize it. You don't want people to talk about it. So instead of debating people or accepting that some can disagree and, fight it out in the arena of ideas, you try to use force, which is what government is. Everything government does comes back to force at some level. You try to use force to shut people down. So I think it's funny how the political spectrum really has shifted over time, because, years ago, and I think Neil Young is a great example of this, right? He was a big protester, rocking in the free world. He did, I think, an anti-war tour, and he called it the Free Speech Tour, or Freedom of Speech Tour. And now here he is, he's trying to get someone like Joe Rogan silenced, right? He's not saying, oh, I just disagree with him, and that's fine. We can have different opinions. He's trying to work with corporations to get Joe Rogan silenced. And obviously in Canada, you see the same thing with people trying to silence independent media. So I think people who are trying to do that should really look at history and say, when has history ever been on the side of people who are trying to limit opinions, limit expression, and limit free speech? It normally doesn't work out that way.
No, it's terrible. And you can cause a lot of damage, but people will eventually find ways around. That's where, as I said, as a symbol, I was heartened by the efforts to shut down the fundraising for the protests and how quickly it completely failed. It just went to a new medium and started raising there. And they're just playing whack-a-mole now. And I suspect if Bill 11 comes in and starts, coming down on people like you and I, we're still going to find alternative ways. It's the modern world. You're just trying to dam a river by putting a stick in the middle of it. We're going to flow around it. And we're still going to get out there, and it is going to backfire in the long run. Yeah,
I mean, it's been a great advertisement for Bitcoin, right? Governments want to, say, oh, just trust us, trust our currency, trust our financial system. Well, that doesn't work if governments use that as a political tool, right? So people look for an alternative, and Bitcoin is showing itself to be a great alternative. And yeah, you're going to see much more of that. The problem is governments, and you see this in the way politicians have been responding to the protests, and even before responding to anyone who criticized, a lot of the draconian measures we're seeing, is they keep acting as if they can just criticizing people who say that will just make it go away, right? Oh, there's, we'll just shut these people down. We'll cut off their fundraising, and then those people are going to go away. But those people are still there, obviously, right? We still have those opinions. We still believe what we're talking about. So you can't really make that go away just by shutting off funding to one source, as you said, right? It's going to go somewhere else. And you see that the approach Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh continue to take is just, they're not going to talk to anybody. They're not going to listen to any criticism, even now within their own party with Joel Lightbound. And they don't seem to realize that just makes things worse, right? The less you're willing to talk to people And the more you just demonize them instead of listening to real concerns, well, you're just going to get people, more and more people are going to start siding with the protesters. You're going to get bigger protests, and it's not going to go well for the government at this point. So I think the politicians really need to wake up and realize you need to start talking to people and listening.
Yeah, dividing, I mean, it's just going to lead to trouble. As I was kind of talking earlier, I'm worried about the protests. If they entrench too long, I don't want to see these end with a bunch of, I mean, they've been incredibly peaceful. But if you go marching in there with the sticks swinging and start arresting and start, hooking up to vehicles, you can turn a situation dangerous really quickly. And if we don't see some respectful discourse, at least starting on this, I don't see how this could end any other way. And that's really troublesome.
Yeah, I suspect that's a bit of what was behind what Joel Lightbound did yesterday. I think he's probably thinking something similar and saying, I think it's about, his conscience, right? He's saying, does he really want to be associated with Justin Trudeau's strategy, which at this point appears to be to provoke the situation and make it worse out of some idea. I guess Trudeau feels he's going to get some sort of long-term political advantage out of the situation getting worse and escalating further. And I think what Joel Lightbound is saying is, look, you can't make these kind of policies and decisions based on, short-term political gain or even long-term political gain. It's got to be about what's best for the country. And I think, you look at I think it was the Angus Reid poll that showed 54% of Canadians want all the restrictions removed. And I think it's really at the point where these politicians are starting to hear from their constituents that enough is enough. It's time to go back to normal. Let people take their own level of risk. And they're looking at someone like Trudeau, who seems extremely stubborn, unwilling to listen to any of that. He seems obsessed with the power he's accumulated and doesn't want to give it up. And they're really questioning whether they actually want to be associated with that. Because, this is a time in history where people have given up a lot of freedom because they're afraid. And, history always shows that people look back on that and they often regret it. They say, my mind was kind of messed up. I was very scared. I was willing to let the government do whatever they wanted. But in the long run, people don't feel good about that. And so I think a lot of politicians are really starting to think, maybe that's not what I want to be associated with in the long term. And they're starting to, find a bit of their conscience.
Yeah. So pivoting, before we wrap up here, a little back to you being out in Manitoba. We know Saskatchewan and Alberta, Saskatchewan's dropping them right away, or have dropped, I believe. Scott Moe's been very clear he wants to get out of the mandates. Alberta's working that way. We've dropped some. How are things looking on your front? I know you've had some challenges with the federal or provincial leadership there and some other issues. What's the situation there with restrictions and timelines?
Yeah, well, the government's kind of hinted that they want to remove everything by spring. Of course, that's relatively vague. We still have more restrictions than Saskatchewan and Alberta. I'd suspect, unfortunately, befitting our place in the country, kind of right in the middle, I suspect our approach will be somewhat in between Saskatchewan and Alberta and then Ontario, right? Ontario, I think today, Christine Elliott said that there's no timetable for getting rid of, mask mandates or restrictions or the vaccine passport. I'd expect Manitoba to probably open up fully and get rid of a lot of that stuff before Ontario does, but not nearly as soon as Saskatchewan and Alberta have. Now, it was interesting, though. I think a few weeks ago, Heather Stephenson, the new premier, had actually talked about, we've got to accept that we're living with COVID and it's got to come down more to personal responsibility. And she got a lot of criticism from the usual suspects, people who are still extremely afraid. So we'll see if she sticks to that. She's obviously, I think, trying to get people to accept that we have to move on. We'll see whether that goes anywhere. But yeah, I suspect the approach of Manitoba will be somewhat between what Saskatchewan does and what Ontario does.
Great. Yeah. Well, the push and pull is always ongoing. Well, before you go there, so where can we find more information on your writing and your updates and where you're getting around out there? I know you've written the occasional columns for the Western Standard and you're quite prolific elsewhere. So let our listeners know where they can find you.
Yeah, the best place is spencerfernando.com and then nationalcitizens.ca. I write a weekly column for them as well.
Great. Well, thank you very much for joining me today, Spencer. It's been a while since we've talked. And, like I said, we overlook the center of our country and it's really a shame on our part. We got to cut that out. So I hope we can talk again sometime soon.
For sure.
Great. Thanks. So, yes, it was Spencer Fernando. And as he said, yes, spencerfernando.com, I believe it was. You can find his columns. He's active on Twitter, as a lot of us are, and on about the issues. He's really good for keeping up with things. Just going to look at some of the comments here. Where was that? Something about Trudeau. There was Genevieve asking about why did Trudeau walk out at a half hour into question period yesterday? Is that allowed? Yeah, that is allowed. And I don't like giving Trudeau much credit for much of anything, but pretty much every party does that to a degree. They'll often get the leader to field the first 3 questions from the leader of the opposition or something and then move them out. Sometimes they'll stay for the whole thing. In Trudeau's case, it's because he's an imbecile and he's weak. And if they kept him too long and he had to try and think on his feet, he wouldn't be able to answer that many questions without stepping on his own tongue. So that is the reason they got him out of there sooner rather than later. But it is allowed. There's nothing to say he has to stay for it. And to be honest, if you ever have to listen through question period and the way Trudeau talks, it's something of a blessing not having to listen to the guy for the whole thing anyways. But again, it is an indication that he's not planning on trying any sort of direct leadership on things or taking anything directly or seriously even. I mean, it's just bizarre, with how divided and big and serious this issue is in Canada. And still we can't get, that's what I was talking about, this lack of leadership, him to come out and just try to be a little respectful, try to speak for all Canadians. That's your job. That's the responsible job. That's the principal job. You don't have to agree with all Canadians. You don't even have to bend to their demands, but you have to respect them. And he hasn't. He has insulted them. He has villainized them. He has called them, the worst of names. And he keeps doing it. He keeps doing it. And what is this? It's not getting any better. Some people do think, and perhaps that's it. He wants to start the riots. He wants to start the reset, I guess. That's a whole separate show. But the motivations of that man, some people talked. I was listening and, some great coverage on, aside from the Western Standard, of course, is Fox News. Boy, they've been watching this Canadian situation a lot. And I look at commentators and some are, who's another fella? Zuby, he's on Twitter. He's a Canadian gentleman and he's got a big following. He's talking about how much he just can't stand that guy. Like Trudeau, when you listen to him, he is fake to his core. And he's not right. Like he's dangerous. People have been saying that he is dangerous. This is a man who is not in my view in his right mind in some ways. And yeah, he's in charge right now with a minority government, thankfully. But we're just in such an odd, bizarre place. Getting a little closer to home, I want to talk a little bit about the responses and reactions to Jason Kenney, of course, announcing getting rid of the vaccine passports. This passport thing, it was always crap. It was always crap. The only possible motivation or justification for having a passport, a means of proving vaccination to go into a business, is if vaccination stopped transmission. Now, it's not medical theory any longer. It's proven. We saw that with Omicron. It does nothing to stop transmission. So if it doesn't stop it, what's the point? And some are honest about it. They'll admit we've got it in because we just want to hound, harass, and annoy people enough that maybe they'll just go out and get vaccinated anyways. And it probably worked on some. But still, those who are willing to get vaccinated have done it. It's done. They're finished. They got it. I got it. I don't know about the booster at this point. I'm getting tired of this crap. We'll see as things develop. But I got the first 2. And that was my choice. That's the thing, is this has to be choice. And taking this passport thing, really, that's getting into coercion, because that's where you're cutting people off. I talked to a friend the other day who did not want to get vaccinated. He said he's thrilled because he'll be able to go to a restaurant for the first time in months. But then I have these idiots. And idiot number 1, and I'm going to be writing a column about her, is Deborah Yedlin. She is the head of the Calgary Chamber of Commerce. And she was just furious that Kenney has lifted the vaccine passports on businesses. And she's saying it's bad for business. What a load of crap. What a load of crap. And then the media it just tries to feed this. I like reporting on the headache and the vein pulsing I get when I drive in to work during the day and I listen to talk radio, which we've got to replace. But they had Ernie Sue on. I've had him on this show before too. He's the head of the Alberta Hospitality Association. And he speaks frankly about these things. He owns Trolley 5 in Calgary, and he speaks up for bars, restaurants, and hospitality in general. And yes, they're thrilled with the raising of the vaccine passport, but he is concerned that they still have limits on people. They can't go table to table with each other. They're still masked. There's still early closures mandated on them. They'd like to see all that lifted as well. But the radio host keeps sticking on that. They wouldn't talk about, by the way, the vaccine passport lifting was a good thing, because he did say it's a good thing, and it is. Look, you've got 15% of the province isn't bloody vaccinated. Now, when you own a bar or restaurant, which I did for 5 years, and we did make money, not a hell of a lot, but we did make money. The average margin in a bar or restaurant in Canada, and this is according to Stats Canada, you can look it up, is under 5%. That's the profit margin. Now you take 15% of your potential customer base out of the mix. And an imbecile like Yedlin's going to say, this is a good thing for business? Because that's what she's saying. Yeah. And she's saying people are going to be scared to go to bars and restaurants now because they don't have the passport. That's what's going to drop business down. Look, people that scared, and some of them are out there because they listen to the bloody mainstream media and that crap. Yeah, they're scared to go out. They're scared to go to a restaurant. You know, those people, those ones who are that terrified of the bug, weren't going out anyway. They were going to bars or restaurants. They're the ones you're still seeing with rubber gloves on as they pick up skip the dishes at the steps, and they take a sanitation shower every 5 minutes or so. No restaurant owner is honestly going to come out and say they wanted and enjoyed the vaccine passport system. None of them are going to come out. I mean, some of them are, you watch. Oh, why? You can see it. I'll bet you anything. Because again, it shows how slanted and disgusting our legacy media is right now. They're going to go up Main Streeting. They're going to go business to business. They're going to find some hipster who runs a coffee shop, say, I wanted the vaccine passport plan. I think it's ridiculous. They got rid of it. They'll find one. They'll find an idiot. There's 1,000 businesses out here. There's always going to be one. For the most part, why would you want to put your staff through that where they've got to be up front? I mean, it costs you money. Every little move of your employee costs you money. People say it's not a big deal. It is a big deal. When you're in a 5% margin business, and now you're dedicating an employee and time and tracking and management to something, it's costing you. It's taking more out of your budget. And you have that person up front hindering your traffic to keep scanning these codes. You're paying that person. You're annoying your patrons. It's not helping your business a bit. And then don't forget, as I said, we know it, it's not stopping the spread. Yet, the Chamber of Commerce says that these passports were good for business. That goes to show how sick a lot of our institutions are out here, not just the media, but things like the Chamber of Commerce. How can you pretend to be an advocate for business when you would say something so stupid? And she just kept going on about it too. But you got to remember, you know how many businesses Deborah Yedlin has run? None. She's never run a business. As far as I can tell, she's never owned one. I don't know. She might have silently owned one elsewhere. I can't say 100%, but I've seen no evidence of it. I tried looking it up this morning before I was working on my column. Yet she's heading the Chamber of Commerce, the Chamber of Woke. And if you look at the Chamber of Commerce in Calgary, it is brutal. It's all it talks about is diversity, bike lanes, crap like that. All the crap that business owners actually don't want to see. But that's who their supposed representative is. Derek pointed out to me, the Western Standard is a member of the Chamber of Commerce in Strathmore because the Calgary one is so sick that we couldn't take part in that. It's junk. So that's where we are with these vaccine passports. Now, with the next thing, of course, are the unions all going bonkers and bananas about the unmasking of students. Yes. Now, here's the other thing we know from 2 years of this. We know COVID doesn't hurt kids. It doesn't. Stop it. Okay? Quit feeding that false narrative. I mean, people, you talk the worst of fear-mongering because we all love our kids. That's our most prized, item in life. I don't like to say possession. That sounds wrong. But you know what I mean. And if we're fearful for the safety of our kids, we will always circle the wagons. Of course, we're concerned about that. So if the mainstream media tries to make us afraid for our children, they can really move public opinion. But kids aren't harmed by COVID, damn it. I mean, we've had Alberta with 4.6 million people. So that's hundreds of thousands. I don't even know the stats, maybe 1 million children under 12. One, I think, passed away. And it gets closer to being with COVID, not of COVID. I mean, they always have a number of other comorbidities, whether it's cancer, obesity, and a lot of things. This isn't getting them. So why are we so worried about masking them? Why are we gagging them like this? We've got to stop it. And so we are. And the masks are coming off on Monday. And it's great. So why are the unions so upset? And they're worried that their teachers are going to be put at risk by the children then? Well, again, we're showing with these infections. And I agree. I think, and I know some commenters are going to get upset. And that's fine. As long as it's a choice, vaccination will reduce the chances of getting harmed by this. That's my opinion on things. People have an opinion where they're fearful for their kids, and certainly they can keep wearing masks. But either way, the kids, it's been unpleasant for them for 2 years now, being masked. And if teachers are vaccinated, they shouldn't be fearful of getting infected, or any more so that at least than going anywhere else. I do have a video that was on deck, I believe, of some children in Israel, because they lifted a mask mandate there. No, okay, we don't have that. We used to have it. But it showed actually a big celebratory thing with the kids taking off their masks, smiling, laughing, throwing them in the garbage, ripping them up, those sorts of things. Because again, it's not normal to spend 2 years staring at your classmates, not able to smile at them, not able to be expressive, things such as that. Let's get on a little more about some other freedoms here. The House of Commons, this was a news item. They voted 173 to 155. There we go, to suspend a data scoop on millions of cell phone users. This was a story that didn't grab enough traction, I think. Telecom customers were never properly advised their data would be tracked and compiled by the Public Health Agency, said members of Parliament. Because yes, they the government had pushed in on your cell providers and were demanding and getting data. They wanted to track your location. They wanted to see what you're up to. And this is very, very serious business. And thankfully, at least there's obviously that much of a glimmer of common sense still remaining in our halls of politics that this was stepping too far. And even in a minority Liberal government, the Commons got up and they voted and say, okay, cut this out. We've got to check into this. This is not justified. Tracking our Canadians by their cell phones like this is not appropriate, and we aren't going to put up with that. So we get some good developments along with some bad. I see Paul Hinman in the lobby. We're going to talk shortly. I'm going to go to an ad break first before talking to Paul. But yes, there's lots going on in Alberta and lots going on up in Fort McMurray on a by-election that should be called pretty soon, and Paul's running in it. Before we go there, though, let's talk about the ones that are paying our bills, along with you guys who are, of course, subscribing to the Western Standard and keeping us rolling. And that's Bitcoin Well. Spencer talked about that earlier. Bitcoin is a way we can get away from government control of your funds, central bank control of your funds, central bank control of currency in general. Well, Bitcoin Well helps you get into that digital currency world with Bitcoin. And it's a safe way to do it. It's non-custodial, as I was saying earlier. They have ATMs and they're in person. They're not some distant digital company where you're going to get a call center or emails or something from somebody on the other end of the planet. They're in the West, they're in Canada. They got in-person white glove service. You can do one-on-one consultations in Edmonton, Calgary, Montreal, and Winnipeg. And they have virtual consultations anywhere in Canada. So you still talk one-on-one with a person. There's a lot of questions. It's kind of scary. It's your money. You worked hard to get it. And if you're going to invest it in something, you really want to know what's going on about it. So these guys walk you through it. They communicate with you. They make sure they know that you are comfortable with investing in it and setting up your Bitcoin account. So check them out, bitcoinwell.com. Get your money out of reach of the state. Always a good idea. Okay, let's get on with our second guest today. We've got Paul Hinman here on deck, and we'll bring him in there in a moment. There we are. How you doing, Paul?
Excellent, Cory. How are you doing?
Very good. Are you, the last time I talked to you, you were up in Fort Mac. Are you still up there, or are you kind of bouncing back and forth now?
No, I'm trenched in here in Fort Mac. This is a battleground. Can't afford to be leaving it. This is too important of an election to just put it to the side. Yeah,
well, and I've campaigned with you before in by-elections, and I know you were a tireless door knocker and ground worker up there. So you've been hammering at it for over a month now. I was saying earlier, so it hasn't officially been called yet, has it? The deadline, I think, is Wednesday, isn't it?
It's the 15th. Is that a Wednesday? Yeah. I'm not sure. I haven't looked at that. I'm just working every day because there's not enough days.
Or maybe that's Tuesday, I think, actually. But so he dragged it out, Jason Premier Kenney, right to the very bitter end before allowing this by-election to happen. So what are you seeing on the ground so far with all your work campaigning?
Well, it's just so promising at the door because people are so fed up with the legacy parties and what they've offered, what they've done to them, what they're proposing for solutions. There are none. It's just more of the same, the status quo, and it's destroying and undermining Fort McMurray and their economy here, their housing prices. They lost their 911 control here. It's really pitiful to see what the last two legacy parties, the NDP and the UCP, are doing to Fort Mac. They treat Fort Mac very much the same way that Ottawa treats Alberta. This is the crown jewel and they get so many tax dollars out of here, but yet they're the last place to get Twin Highway. They're the last place to get senior care facility for their seniors that have lived here. They're the last place to upgrade the hospitals, and they're always battling to, at what level of care can they give here, because they want to send people 5 hours away to Edmonton. There's so many frustrating things here locally that need to be changed, and the Wildrose has the solutions for those changes, because we need to collect taxes locally and send them to Edmonton, not and just as we need to collect our taxes here in Alberta and not send them to Ottawa, because once you have someone else the master of your account, they decide. They've got their destiny and their decisions in their hands, not ours.
Yeah, well, and we've been talking about those sort of things in Alberta, unfortunately, for decades, and governments pay lip service to those issues very often. We listened and watched the Fair Deal panel go all over the province and come to a lot of those conclusions. But to date, I don't think a single one of those recommendations from that panel has been brought in yet, has it?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, this is just the typical Jason Kenney and government saying, oh, we're listening. No, you need to be acting. You need to be doing. And they're doing more harm than good by not acting.
So now you're in a really unusual race out there. You do have Brian Jean running for the UCP there, but Brian's kind of running on an anti-Jason Kenney platform in a sense. I guess I'm just trying to distinguish. This is so unique in a sense. You don't often see somebody actually actively running in an election in opposition to their own leader. But in the meantime, I mean, you're running, I guess you're looking more broadly as an entire option to the UCP rather than just specifically with the leader of that party.
Oh, our governments are just destroying our economy. I mean, what they're doing and throwing Fort McMurray under the bus. You have, our prime minister who wants to shut down the oil sands. We have Rachel Notley in opposition wants to shut down oil sands. And we have both Jason Kenney and Brian Jean on the record that they want to meet the Paris Accord, which, that just phase out the oil sands. And as an economy like this, a mining city, when it starts to shrink, it's a decimating situation, because there's nobody to come in and to buy a new house, and house prices fall. I've talked to individuals that are $250,000 under their mortgage, and if they lose their job here, they're finished. And it's just terrible to see the incompetence of government, their policies, and what it's doing to our crown jewel here in Alberta.
Yeah, negative equity. Now, there's a terrifying thing. We saw a lot of that in Alberta, for those of us old enough to remember the mid-'80s when the National Energy Program cut the legs out from under us and the interest rates went through the roof, and people literally had to walk away from their homes because they owed far more on their home than it was actually worth. And we're seeing that in Fort McMurray. I mean, this is ridiculous. We have oil, I think, got near $90 a barrel today. Fort McMurray is sitting on some of the most abundant, natural resources in the world. They should be booming up there. It should be, if anything, the house prices should be going up. Yet the only explanation we have that it isn't is government.
Oh, absolutely. And government policies. I mean, when they lost Tech Frontier last year, that was the beginning of the chokehold that really is affecting this economy. And Suncor, I mean, their capital was reduced 10%. And as soon as you start shrinking, you know how devastating that is, Cory, to the future. And it's just unacceptable. And it's policy, that they say, the pipeline issue is a big problem. But this attack on CO2 is unbelievable. And again, it's the same narrative that they used for COVID and for climate change. And they won't allow for an open, honest discussion. They basically just strangle any opposition or open discussion on this. And it's ridiculous to think that we're going to shut down our oil and gas, our oil sands, to buy it from Saudi or Nigeria or Venezuela. We have a world-class operation going here, and it's second to none in the world. And yet these people want to shut it down for what? Virtue signaling, for personal, acknowledgement to the world. Oh, look at us. They're hypocrites. They all live a luxurious life on hydrocarbons, and they want to take it away from the people. And this idea that we're getting a 25% increase on our carbon tax here on the 1st of April, that only hurts Canada. It hurts every individual. There is nothing good out of this carbon tax going up, and we need to stand up and say no. And that's what this by-election is about. Is it about us making decisions of our future? Who's the master of our future? Is it going to be someone like Trudeau, or who's it going to be?
So I'm going to pivot a little bit. You're, a leader of an entire party, and you're well dialed into Southern Alberta, of course. We've had that ongoing, basically, I'll use the term standoff. It's been back and forth. They're letting traffic through. They're not letting traffic through. But we have a big protest happening in Coots. A lot of farmers, a lot of truckers. What do you see there? What kind of resolution do you think we might be able to get into? I mean, politically, we're seeing a football being tossed back and forth. The feds don't want to touch it. The province doesn't want to dive in, but they might have no choice pretty soon. What can be done down there?
This is pure incompetence and overreach of government. I use the analogy. This is like a burglar who's broke into your house and you're doing house repairs and you didn't have a safety rail up in the hole and he falls down, hurts himself. Well, he's intruding in your house and you're in court defending yourself. These people have lost their constitutional rights. We have a federal government and provincial government that have imposed mandates that they've never been able to demonstrably justify, and that they yet want to attack these people that have been hurt so bad. They've lost their livelihood. I mean, I've talked to 4 mothers who have lost their sons to suicide, Cory. The actions of these governments is reprehensible, and all they need to do is actually come forward and say, you know what, we went against our emergency management teams. We took it into our own hands. We were wrong. We've censored the discussion on how to handle COVID, and we've had this idea that if we just lock down for 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years till we get a vaccine, that it's the panacea. When you look to Israel and other places, it's not working. It's not a one-shot fix-all, and they need to back up and say we were wrong, and we're not ever going to do this again. I mean, the emergency management teams have said this is the wrong thing. You don't lock down people for this type of an emergency. You lock down those who need to be protected, and you protect those going in. But bottom line, it's a simple solution. Both governments need to admit they're wrong and allow people to be educated, make decisions for themselves, and those that feel comfortable to carry on their work, let them work. And the idea that how many, just hundreds and thousands of people here in Alberta have lost their jobs or they're laid off without pay, and it's decimating, Cory. It's just wrong. Government's wrong, and they need to admit it, apologize, and say they're not going to do this again.
Well, boy, that's something, unfortunately, that's extremely rare to come out of government's own mouths, is to admit that they're wrong. But I mean, eventually you have to bend.
History is going to show that they were wrong. It's just there's just so much overwhelming evidence, Cory, that what they're doing is causing more harm than the virus, and it's wrong. And again, the fear mongering that they've done, all of the numbers that they put out. I mean, for the premier to come out and give all those statistics and stuff yesterday, well, the fact of the matter is that we know that they have sensationalized the numbers in hospitals that are actually there because of COVID. Yes, they have COVID, but everything that they've put out every day is about putting fear into the people. And that's the biggest thing, I guess, when you talk what the government really needs to do, is they need to do a mea culpa on the fear mongering that they've done, and says, we took these numbers, we thought that by scaring you into doing these things that you would do better. And it's just not, it's not going to work.
No, and I mean, well, the government now, and they're racked with a lot of internal fighting that's going on. I mean, it's constantly leaking out. There's individual members of the legislature coming out and speaking a different message from the central government. It looks like they try to rein them in, and they have meetings, but they're herding cats, and I think it's falling apart. Have you been talking, though, to other people in the legislature? Are there, I know it's throwing a loaded one out there, but are there some perhaps considering new party allegiances at this time?
I'm not going to comment on that, Cory. And the biggest reason why is that there's nothing more pitiful than when someone switches allegiance because they think they're losing. I mean, we should be standing up for the principles and the policies that we believe. Jason Kenney needs to stand up for Alberta and tell Trudeau to end all mandates. I mean, what a hypocrite he was 2 weeks ago to say, oh, let the truckers into Alberta, but by the way, we're keeping our mandate in place, and these second and third class unclean citizens can't come into our restaurants and stuff, but they can come in the back door and deliver what we need. I mean, the hypocrisy in this has been terrible, but the censorship and the fear mongering is what's caused the damage. And they need to reverse that. And they need to admit it that, we didn't look at it. This is like a judge who only is looking at the perpetrator and refuses to listen to the testimony of the victim. And that's what's going on here. And I'm sorry, but way too many of these people are coming to the parade way too late. It's only because they've seen the trucker convoy and Canadians across this country rallying, saying, you know what, the government's overstepped its bounds and we're not going to take it anymore. But I tell you, Trudeau and many, you look through history, and any of these totalitarian individuals, they'll push it to the death. They want the death of the party. They're going to hang on there, and they're not going to accept it. And so it's a tough battle, but boy, we've got to fight and win this one now, just like we got to win this battle in Fort McMurray, send an earthquake that, the people actually want to be masters of government, not government masters of the people and their living, their occupation, their health decisions, the autonomy of their body. All of these things, Cory, have been lost. And people are quickly now realizing that you can't trust government. You can't trust the chief medical officers. That they do not have the interest of the people at heart. What they have is the integrity of their system that's been failing for 20 years, and they continue to want to protect it. And it's just totally wrong, Cory.
I think a lot of what people are getting tired of too is just the political games. I mean, you and I have been immersed in many of them over the years anyways, and just the internal play and the garbage. I mean, as citizens want more, and we understand there's going to be some of that going on, but we just want to see some more honesty. Yeah. And that's been, I mean, Jason Kenney, of all things, if nothing else, is a master politician. And he certainly knows those games. But we watched, him trying to rig and avoid going to a leadership review, and then finally kicking it down to mid-April. And as I said, I think it's kind of blowing up on him. So assuming that, the by-election gets called, well, it has to within a few days, that one's going to be wrapped up in mid-March, not too long before Jason Kenney's leadership review. And I guess if there was a Wildrose member up there, that would certainly shake up the establishment a little, wouldn't it?
It's an earthquake that will go across not only Alberta, but Canada. Is that the people have had enough of these tyrants. The people have had enough of these, I don't know, I'm rude about this, but I call them intellectual idiots. They're sitting at the table eating chicken nuggets while they're plotting to get rid of chicken farms. These people don't know where their food comes from. They don't know where their energy comes from. And they have no connection to the working well here in Alberta or Canada. And they need to be tossed. And this is always the case. More governments are voted out than voted in. And they need to have a choice. And this time, rather than vote Jason and the incompetent UCP and their totalitarian idea out to get Rachel Notley, they actually have a choice to vote for freedom. And that's what's so important. And to realize, up here, why is Brian Jean running? I mean, he's a two-time quitter. And if Jason Kenney, if he gets elected on March 15th and Jason Kenney survives his leadership review, is Brian Jean just going to quit again? I don't know. It's so disappointing to me. And again, the fact that he wants to meet the Paris Accord, are you kidding me? Like how disconnected is he or concerned about Fort McMurray and the future of Alberta?
Yeah, well, and sometimes some of those politicians actually have their eyes on some federal ambitions, so they kind of talk out of both sides of their mouths to hedge their bets on possibly getting to a larger legislature in Ottawa. I know you've never shown interest. You've been quite as Albertan as it gets anyways. So where can people find, more information on your campaign, on the party, and to keep track of what you're doing and support you if they choose to?
Well, they can go to wildrosenation.com. And they can call 1-888-262-1888. And when they go to the wildrosenation.com, they can click on constituencies and then go to Fort McMurray Lac La Biche, and they can donate there or support, buy a membership, and email us their support, their concerns. But this is a battle, and we need to get there. And they can just email to byelections@wildrosenation.com. And by-election at wildrosenation.com.
Great. Well, thanks for coming in to take a break from the door knocking and working there to join me, Paul. And this time we didn't have the tech issues to interrupt as last time, so that's great. Everybody got to hear you nice and clearly. And well, happy campaigning up there. I'm sure we'll be checking in again sometime soon.
Appreciate that, Cory, and take care. And God bless Alberta. We've got to save it from these governments. They're just unbelievable.
Great. Thanks, Paul. Okay, so that was Paul Hinman, who is running in the by-election in Fort McMurray. Again, whenever Well, he doesn't have a choice any longer. The by-election is going to be called by the 15th. They've stretched it out as long as humanly possible. That sort of shows political motivation as well, really. You know, I mean, if he could have gotten away with holding it off for a year, he would have done so. And that would mean the people up there wouldn't have a representative for a year, all because it was politically inconvenient to go to a by-election for the leader of the party. A principled leader would say, okay, we'll give it a month or two for people to get their stuff together, because of course you can't turn on a dime, but we got to get a representative up there for those constituents as soon as possible, and let's call a by-election. But no, he's dragged it on all the way to the bitter end for 6 months. And well, that could backfire. It's as I've talked about, and you know, full disclosure, I've worked with Paul in party campaigns and many things a lot of times over the years. So yeah, I've got a bias. I've got nothing but respect for Paul. He's a fantastic person, politically principled, and as a good libertarian-minded man, he's been a mentor to me in a number of ways. So I'm not talking about whether you should vote for Paul or not. I mean, but as an individual, I certainly can't say enough good things about him. And I also know, as I was saying, I wasn't exaggerating, he's a tireless door knocker. He is working the ground up there like crazy. Nobody expected Paul to win Calgary-Glenmore when the Stelmach government was, you know, in a strong majority in Alberta, and Paul took that seat in an upset because he hustled out there. And these by-elections can be an opportunity for people to voice change. So it'll be very interesting to watch how it develops. Commenters, I see Terry Newman saying, politicians tend not to paint themselves into corners. Yeah, Terry, I agree. And I think, though, that shows how badly Jason Kenney has been slipping. I mean, he doesn't know what to do anymore. I've talked about it before, too. I got respect for Kenney. I really do. I still do. I don't want him to see him as premier anymore. I think he's blown it way too badly. But I do respect him, and I think he was great in Ottawa as a cabinet minister. He was a great opposition member. But it's not the same as leading a party. That's a different skill. And he can't seem to master it. Now they're running around all over the place. His policies bounce back and forth. They're inconsistent. Albertans have lost trust. I mean, his support numbers are just in the toilet, and he doesn't know what to do. And that's why things like this, he's just put it off and put it off and put it off. Now it's caught up with him. He put off getting into a leadership review. It didn't matter. It's coming on April 9th, and there are people lining up looking to take him out. We'll see what happens there. That'll be in Red Deer, April 9th. I'll point that out too for people who have memberships. If you're interested in that, it's $100, I think, for the early registration if you want to get up there and vote. That's how he tried to stack it for himself. You know, make sure it's expensive, and you can get your loyalists up there rather than other individuals. And you got to vote in person. And the price will go up the closer you get to the time that's there. So if you're interested in it, you might want to register sooner rather than later, whether you're voting for or against Premier Kenney. That's where your opportunity is going to be in Red Deer. And again, with this by-election coming, there's no outcome in this by-election that Kenney's going to win. Talk about no win. Talk about painted into a corner. He's either going to have Paul in there with a new party making inroads and, you know, with the Wildrose Independence Party up there, or he's going to have Brian Jean, who, as I said, the whole basis of his policy is just anti-Kenney. He doesn't really speak much broadly beyond that. Or going farther out, what's he going to get? NDP or Alberta Party or something? I mean, nothing is good for Kenney in that by-election. So it's little wonder he kept putting it off. But a leader would have found a way to address it head on. A leader would have got a strong candidate in there, and a leader would have dove into it, say, okay, let's get in there and get that representative, and let's make them a UCP one for me or whatever. And Premier Kenney was incapable of doing that. And now he's in some terrible trouble up there. And again, we're not hearing about it. Where's the legacy media talking about this pending by-election up in Fort McMurray? I'm sure they'll pay attention to it at the last second, but let's talk about it. We don't get opportunities for Albertans to get off their butts and votes. We look at those support numbers for the UCP these days, and that can be reflected in the Democratic vote up in Fort Mac. And that's a volatile riding. It's an interesting one. It's not, that one's not set for anybody. The population up there is very diverse, and they're very pressured. And I mean, with the between COVID, between the energy problems, as Paul was saying, people are in fear for their livelihoods, for their homes. They could vote in ways that nobody would have seen or anticipated. And of course, I love seeing people going out there and shaking the establishment and voting ways that people didn't anticipate. So it's going to be one to watch. Let's see, back to the convoy blockades. I just getting back into some of the news and stuff. We had, because I was asking, it's difficult. What can he do to stop it down on the border, or what should he do? And a lot of people have a lot of strong opinions about that. But the federal vaccine mandates, they're federal. There's nothing Kenney can do about it. He has spoken up saying that Trudeau should drop it. We know Trudeau couldn't care less what Premier Kenney thinks, credit to do where it's due. At least Kenny said he'll do something about it. But I guess in removing them, that somehow becomes provincial responsibility. And that's why Sonia Savage, the minister, was out the other day saying we're going to get more RCMP officers in there and that it's got to come to an end and we're going to enforce and we're going to move these people out of there. I guess in the cabinet in Ottawa, they said they have no role in forcing an end to the convoy blockades. Transport Minister Omar Al-Ghabra said 70 trade groups petitioned the cabinet to force an end to the border blockades at Windsor and Coutts. But he said, it's not our problem. We can't do anything about it. So somebody's got to do something, or maybe they don't. But it throws it on the lap of the premiers, and the premiers don't want to dive into that. As I said, cleaning up these protests, stopping them, intervening in them is not as easy as some people seem to think they're going to be. They, these are entrenched people, they're peaceful people, but they can be provoked and it can go badly. And it can go badly for those people, and it can be bad for the government that gets into the mix of that. Let's see, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said the other night, so the Freedom Convoy movement has to stop, as he spoke in the Commons. So this is a little bit back. And he talked about the truckers opposed to vaccine mandates as wearing tinfoil hats, saying people don't have the right to block streets illegally, to harass their fellow citizens, and people want to go to work, go to school. Nobody, the streets have been getting blocked, but despite some reports and anecdotes, people aren't being harassed in the streets. I've been, and as Spencer was talking, as I was saying, I've gone now to these protests, and sure, you might get a handful of kooks. You always will. You get thousands of people together. That's going to happen. That's law of averages. For the most part, very calm, happy, positive thinking people, and they're self-policing. That was brought up too, and is not being given enough credit. That video showing the people pulling that ugly, ridiculous Confederate flag out of their protest, saying, "Go away! We do not want you here. This does not represent us." The swastika that was clearly probably a setup hanging around. It never even got into the protests, but that's all the media reports on. I've gotten into some things I have seen though, and Jane brought it up too. And I've seen this. I saw this at the rodeo we went to last spring. I saw this at the protest the other day, and I saw these in some protests downtown. And I know some people got upset at me on Twitter because I called it out. But there were some people bothering people who've chosen to wear masks. Not most of them. Most of them are nothing but, again, peace and love and let's have choice. And they did not reflect the majority. But I mean, at one protest I went to with James in Calgary down by City Hall, we actually saw people going into the streets where people were stopped at red lights and yelling at people who were wearing masks in their cars and calling them names and things. And that's scary, it's intimidating, and it's wrong. I know, and I saw some of the debates from people online. They're saying, well, there's been people yelling at me for not having a mask and getting in my face. Well, fair enough, they probably have. There's some jerks there too. But let's go back to the old lesson our parents told us, and it's a good one. 2 wrongs don't make a right. You can roll your eyes at them. You can, think you're being a wiener driving around all alone in a vehicle with a mask on or walking in a park with a mask on, but let them do it. And everything's it's a battle for public perception. That's the thing that does move the politicians in the end. And the mainstream media, we know they want to put out those negative stories. So if they can get images of people harassing or bothering people who chose to be a mask, they're going to put it out there. And I mean, I've seen some other ridiculous reports, and again, there's never any good evidence of it, of people outright being attacked for wearing a mask. Nothing's impossible. I find them very dubious, though. And well, okay, it looks like we got a spammer there. I'll block. Okay, somebody calling us the MSM. Yes, apparently we're mainstream. I wonder where that tipping point hits, if we get over enough followers, we suddenly become the mainstream. I don't think anybody's mistaking us for legacy media at this point. We speak way too much truth for that. So, yeah, getting back to the masks, just let's all be polite to each other. That's all, and watch it and keep self-policing. Let's not make any let's not make it any easier for the legacy media to falsely report stuff and ridiculously paint protesters as being extreme or dangerous or unkind. And yeah, Nico brought up my Twitter handle for those people who like good debates and fighting with me. Again, you don't always have to agree with me. A lot of people don't. At Cory B. Morgan, that's my Twitter account, and I'm typically pretty responsive on there. That's where I do play around a lot. Maybe I'll throw a plug in. Yeah, so if you got guest ideas, feedback, things like that, cmorgan@westernstandardonline.com for my email. And again, I'm just going to remind everybody, if you haven't subscribed yet, go to the westernstandardonline.com. That story Dave was talking about, Polyev, I haven't had a chance to look. It might be up. It's going to be coming up pretty soon. I'm sure other stories have been popping up as we've been having this show. Get on there, check out the site, take out a membership, check out the newsletter. You can get updates every day and see what's happening and what we're reporting on. And it's fluid. You want to keep checking back into the site, knowing news as it breaks. Clean news, you know, and this is the real stuff. Dave, Mel, Eva, Amber, Reed, we got reporters all over the place, and they're calling, they're following up, reporting news, and we're bypassing the legacy media, but we need you guys to do it. We need you subscribers getting in there, $10 a month, worth every penny. A couple other stories I saw, I think Dave didn't bring it up. A couple of police officers keep speaking up. These are individuals, one was in, boy, you know, we need more news people who have easier to pronounce names. But Calgary police officer Nick Matyika, he's disgusted with the way the officers are being treated by politicians and used in the Truckers for Freedom convoy in Ottawa. You know, officers get stuck in the middle. They're in a hard place. They're people like everyone else, and you know, they're being put into an awkward situation. They don't want to crack down on people. There's another one. She went into tears, and that video and posting is up on our site as well. And that's Elena Galisheva. Sorry, this is terrible. Why is it most of these police officers got those Eastern European names? Hey, nothing against you Eastern European guys, but boy, you challenged my tongue when I got to pronounce those things. Where's Officer Smith coming out on one of these? Either way, go to the site. Then you don't have to deal with my horrible pronunciation of these people's names. And you can see these videos yourself and read them, and maybe email me and tell me how to properly pronounce them, so I quit insulting their names with such things. Another update too, something that Derek brought up earlier today that everybody's kind of forgotten. Kenny lifted that with his announcement, but did you know there used to be a work from home order? Yeah, that's been in place actually for a long time. You wouldn't know it. Nobody's staying home. Nobody's been avoiding going to work, and that's part of all of this with the mandates and everything too. Compared to how it was, you know, almost 2 years ago when they first came in, and the streets really were ghostly, and people didn't know what was going to happen, and they stayed in hiding and they avoided work if at all possible. This time they were told to do so, even since before Christmas. You didn't see a difference. People were going out. It hasn't changed. That's a mandate he lifted, and nobody even really knew it is happening. That's quite a development to things, you know. Where else? What else have we got? Oh, yes, this is one. Let's just talk about the woke. Okay. So Nico's got let's throw that video. I talked about it earlier with the kids in Israel who got unmasked. Just because it's upbeat and it's nice and it's really good to see kids. And I bet we're going to see a bunch of videos like this on Monday. So Nico's going to play this, and I'll be right back.
בהחלטת הממשלה הוחלט שמהיום לא צריך מסכות גם בכיתה.
Okay, so I mean, and I'm just going to verbalize this a bit for the people who are just listening on through the podcast network. By the way, you know, you can download the audio, listen to this at your leisure through your computer, in your car, things like that. You know, check it out. We're Podbeam's our main one where we host it, and you should be able to find the Western Standard, even the Pipeline on Podbeam, so that you can regularly catch up that way if you can't watch these episodes on here. We're also on YouTube, Rumble, and Facebook is where we got most of our videos. You know, follow us on all of those, especially the Rumble, in my view. I want to drive more people towards that because we just can't trust these social media giants anymore. And you just never know if we might lose access to one or another. We don't intend to. But, you know, the more that you guys are following on a broader base, the better the chance we can avoid that sort of cancellation effort. So if you haven't already, you know, subscribe. And that's when you see these things break too. We broke in last week, you know, when things were happening over on the border there with the convoy, and James was coming in live. We don't know when news is going to break, so we just cut in. And if you got a subscription, you'll see the alert pop up on your phone or your laptop or whatever way you may, so you can see these news stories as they actually break. Either way, it was just great, you know, watching those kids in Israel. They were, you know, they were told they didn't have to wear the mask. Yeah, sure, it was probably a little staged, but they were truly happy. They were ripping them off their faces. They were throwing them. They were tearing them apart. These kids don't want to wear those things. They're just not natural. It's not good. And again, we aren't seeing a lot of benefit from them. So, I mean, that was just something nice to play as we get towards the end of the show. Something else, I guess, in a laughable way, and I want to hit on, speaking of woke, crazy culture, Adele, the singer who's been very popular, fan favorite for many a person with a lot of her songs and things. It's not my style. I'm a heavy metal guy, but all the same for those who do love Adele's stuff. Well, she dared in an award ceremony. She dared say she loved being a woman. Yeah, that's it. She loves being a woman, and she's being castigated. Oh, they are coming after her. How dare you say that? That's horrible. That's insane. I mean, no, she's not insane. People actually are so woke, their brains fell out, where they would say that it's controversial for a woman to say she loves being a woman. And I mean, this weird mental leap you have to say, as if that was somehow, I guess, an insult to women who weren't born women. I mean, I respect trans people, and if a person is trans and identifies as a woman, I will most certainly recognize them as a woman in any means, at least realistically possible, of course. And likewise with one who's transitioned to man. But don't go out and say that we can't even say we love being a woman. What if a trans woman said she loved being a woman? What's wrong with that? But this bizarre woke ridiculousness of saying that a person now can't even speak about the gender that they have. I mean, they're trying to come into, I think, the crazed woke, the extreme woke, and unfortunately they're getting more and more prominent. But they're trying to create this world where there actually won't be any kind of form of gender whatsoever anymore. We won't talk about those things; they won't exist. But it's unrealistic. It's divisive. It's bad for us, and frankly, it's stupid. But I like exposing it for when it gets excessively stupid. So when you're going to get on Adele's case for daring to say she loves being a woman, then let's just look at how nuts these guys are. Dave's got a story now he was talking about that was breaking. I see him. If you want to give me a wave, I will pull you in on that. Okay, we're going to pull Dave in because he's got something breaking. Dave Naylor, our news editor. He teased about that before. Hey, Dave, so we've got something on Mr. Poilievre.
Yeah, national exclusive, Cory. Sources close to Poilievre have told the Western Standard that they've hired a national neophyte, basically a newbie on the national scene, a young man called Jeremy Litke, and he is going to be the campaign director for Poilievre. He knows Poilievre quite well. He's sort of been the campaign manager locally for him in the Ottawa-Carleton riding in the last two federal elections. But this will be his first time on the national stage. The source says they're very excited. He's well respected on the Hill. And as the source said, that Pierre doesn't empower idiots. So he thinks it's all part of the party renewal plan that he's got, and trying to get younger blood into the conservative hierarchy. So all that story's fresh and new on the Western Standard site right now, Cory.
Great. Well, as soon as the show's done, which will be coming there shortly, everybody get over and have a deeper look at that. And there's the cover of it from Nico. Man, he moves quickly. Thanks for bringing that to our attention, Dave. You warned of it earlier, and great. As we said, it's an exclusive. We're right on top of that. And I'll speak to the audience a little on why that's significant for the people who are less political weenies like us.
Thanks, Cory.
Thanks, Dave. So, I mean, because what that does say, and what Dave was talking about was, for those of us who follow politics a lot, and I know a lot of our listeners do and viewers as well, but we see those same old names. You see the same old staffers, the same old strategists, the same old party insiders always tied in. And for Poilievre, who is obviously already the leading contender and very possibly might be our next prime minister, to get a virtual unknown based on, and he's saying it outright, it sounds like in the story, principle. He wants a fresh start. Let's get new people in there, not some of the same old. It is significant. And that's significant on the tone of what he's going for. It's definitely going to upset some of the old party faithful who are always stuck on the old ways, the staffers. Those are if anything, what put me off organized politics when I haven't taken part in it anymore is the staffer class. And I don't want to knock them all. There's some really good staffers out there and everything, but there's a large number of self-important dorks who wander around. You see them in Ottawa. They're just scurrying around like ants, always in ill-fitting suits and a big attitude. But they're always the same ones. You keep seeing those names over and over, and I don't want to knock them all. There's some really good, hardworking ones in there. But for Poilievre to bring out a fresh name and kick off his campaign in such an important role like that is significant and says a lot about the tone and direction that Mr. Poilievre is going to be going in with his campaign. So that is a big development, and it was a Western Standard exclusive. So check that out after the show, the full story there from Dave Naylor. And somebody's saying Poilievre pulled out of the leadership race today. So you see, no, Poilievre is still in the race, and goes to show that the fake news isn't limited just to the mainstream outlets sometimes. And we will report on things if he does choose to pull out at any point, though, or if he wins the race. We always report on those. So again, make sure to go to the westernstandardonline.com, take out a subscription, keep up with this news as it breaks. We'll keep getting it to you. Tomorrow, I've got one guest lined up and another we might see soon. It sounds like somebody from the Justice Center for Conservative Freedoms. If not John Carpe, he's giving me another one because they've got so many things going right now. They are the organization that's been fighting on behalf of the convoy protesters all across Canada. Plus, they've been fighting on behalf of restaurant owners. They've been standing up for rights all over the place. So we're going to get an update and see what their organization is doing at the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. And of course, I will have some more ranting. I will have some more news, and we will cover things, and we'll have more discourse in the comments and the rest as well. So thank you all for tuning in with me today. Another great show, another great turnout out there. Thanks to you subscribers, and I will rant at you tomorrow.